The bill before the House is simply political cover for liberals who rushed their $800 billion stimulus bill through the House, ensuring these AIG bonuses would be paid. You know, Mr. Speaker, if the members had had more than 12 hours to read this 1,100-page, $800 billion stimulus bill, we might have been able to spot problems like this before members were forced to vote. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, one of the members who voted for this stimulus bill is the sponsor of the legislation before us. Mr. Grayson, I'd like to ask the gentleman from Florida if he would yield for a question. Mr. Grayson, if he would yield, I'll yield my time. Mr. Grayson, I'd like to yield to you, please, sir. For a question, please, sir. Ms. Grayson, thank you very much. Because I would like to ask the gentleman from Florida. Now, thank you, Mr. Grayson. I'd like to yield to you, sir, if I could, before I yield very quickly, if I could, sir, would you just please answer yes or no if you read the 1,100-page stimulus bill before the vote?
The gentleman's time has expired.
The gentleman, an additional minute. Additional minute.
The gentleman is recognized for an additional 1 minute.
Did you read the bill before the vote? There's your answer, Mr. Speaker. It's, I think, a terrible injustice to the taxpayers of America that the liberal leadership of this House is jamming through $800 billion spending bills without committee hearings, with very little committee hearing, less than 12 hours notice, without the opportunity for members to read the bill, a majority that promised to be the most transparent, accountable, and honest majority in Congress in history. Underneath the president who promised that he would not sign a bill that was not laid out for at least 5 legislative days. The member from Florida walks away from the microphone. The author of the amendment before us can't even tell us if he read the bill. American taxpayers deserve better at a time of economic crisis. When we are guardians of the Treasury, our responsibility as trustees to protect our children and grandchildren from financial ruin. In 60 days, Mr. Speaker, this liberal majority has spent over $1.3 trillion, money our kids cannot afford, and they haven't even read the bill.
The gentleman's time has expired. Let me remind members that they should address the chair even in a colloquy. The gentleman from Texas's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time.
Mr. Chairman,
the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yield myself such time as they may consume.
For as much time as he may consume.
This is really extraordinary. What you have just heard is a denunciation of something that was done by the Congress a few weeks ago and a refusal to undo it. I have never seen people, Mr. Chairman, so attached to something they hate. This is presumably a psychological disorder which I am not equipped to diagnose. The objection of the gentleman from Texas was that when this recovery bill was passed, and it was passed too quickly, we set a deadline, it included a provision that shouldn't have been in there. This bill takes it out. It takes it out in a way that makes sure it will have had no effect, because it dealt with something in the past, and it is undone by this. And speaking about being undone, my Republican colleagues are being undone by the loss of their whipping boy.
Mr. Chairman, would you yield? Would you yield?
I will yield.
Mr. Chairman, truly all I ask is transparency. All we ask is time for the taxpayers and the people of America to read the bill before it's voting on.
I will take back my time. The bill under consideration is 5.5 pages. I believe even the gentleman from Texas could have read it by now. And if the gentleman from Texas has not been able to read this 5.5-page bill, I'll talk long. Even if he reads slow, he'll get it done. The point is that this bill undoes what he is complaining about. Note the refusal to address the subject. The complaint was that the bill adopted in the amendment in the recovery package said that bonuses in the past given by AIG or anybody else wouldn't be covered by the restrictions in that bill. This undoes it. This takes it away. My colleagues on the other side, it's kind of like kids who have had a toy bear or a blanket, and this security blanket means a lot to them. Their security blanket is being able to complain about something that happened before the break. This bill undoes what happened before the break and makes it a nullity. They, at some point, Mr. Chairman, have to outgrow the security blanket. Now, of course, here's their real problem. They do not want to vote for a bill that restricts excessive pay and unreasonable bonuses. The gentleman from Texas has now had a chance to read the bill and has a question for me about this bill. I'll yield.
Would you yield?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, truly, in all sincerity, I would ask only if you, as chairman, would promise us that you would lay these bills out for 72 hours before the vote for the American people to read the bill. My objection is to the 1,100-page, $800 billion stimulus, which was laid out for 12 hours, not giving us...
But I'll take back my time to say that this is the bill that came out of the Financial Services Committee. And though it was not out for 72 hours, it was out for much more than 72 hours. We, in fact, marked up the bill in an open markup with amendments last Wednesday. We voted on it on Thursday.
Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. The gentleman wants to debate a bill that was passed in February. He can take all the special orders he wants to beat that dead horse, because it is a dead horse, Mr. Chairman. This bill that he does not want to debate the merits of, that he is apparently prepared to vote against and is looking for some reason to, undoes what was done back then for the recipients of TARP funds. So that's the issue. And this bill was marked up in committee. It was fully debated in committee. It was
on this bill, you're right.
No, I'm sorry. The gentleman has twice asked me to yield for questions.
The gentleman from Massachusetts controls
I have twice yielded to the gentleman for questions which I must say, in all parliamentary decorum, did not seem to me substantially to add to the quality of the debate, because we're on this bill that he doesn't want to talk about. This bill was out. It was debated. It has been made for us. We have amendments that will be considered to be adopted that were also made public for some time. Here's the point. This bill addresses what members on the other side complained about. They regret that fact, apparently. They would rather complain than have us undo the source of their complaints. And so that's why they are dealing so unhappily with this legislation. Now, let me get back to the merits of this bill. It says that if you have received capital contributions under the TARP, like AIG, AIG, by the way, was originally, of course, given money under the Bush administration by the Bush-appointed head of the Federal Reserve with the approval of the Bush-appointed Secretary of the Treasury. It later got TARP funds. We then in the Senate saw, from the senator from Connecticut, restrictions. He deserves credit for adding restrictions when no one else had pushed for them. He didn't get all the restrictions that he should have gotten because of other people objecting. There was a restriction there was a requirement that the restrictions not be retroactive. Members complained about that. This bill fixes it. Let me emphasize again, this bill undoes the exemption of retroactive bonuses from the Dodd language. I don't understand why people are opposed. No, let me expand to the gentleman from Texas. I yielded to him twice. I'm not going to continue to let the gentleman from Texas evade the issue by not debating this bill. He has his own time, and he can. Mr. Chairman, I ask you to instruct the gentleman. He can get.
The gentleman from Massachusetts controls the time.
He can get time for the gentleman from Georgia. I'm not going to waste the limited time we have to explain this bill with this kind of continued lament for the passage of a complaint. What the bill says is, and I want to stress, it's only for people who get capital funds under the TARP. This does not interfere with small business lending. It does not interfere with people participating in the impaired asset program, and I can guarantee that it will not be so extended. It says that if you get a capital contribution under the TARP bill, as long as you have that contribution, you cannot make payments that are excessive and unreasonable. You can give bonuses if they are performance-based, and it repeals what the Republicans have been complaining about. And Mr. Chairman, in closing, let me say, I condole them on their loss. Their attachment to what they hated is truly impressive, but they are going to have to live with the fact that we are going to undo that, and they are now going to have to talk about what this bill does. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Fox.
The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Fox, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman from Georgia for yielding. And I do want to talk about this bill, but it is very difficult to talk about this bill without also talking about the bill that it is going to undo. But what I would like to point out, and I'm sorry I didn't think of this sooner, but this bill really is redundant, and if it isn't political theater, then I don't understand why we have to have the word executive or employee in this bill. I assume that every executive is also an employee. If this bill isn't written as political theater, then we would simply say any employee, because an executive is an employee. So I would like to ask the gentleman from Massachusetts if he would ask the Rules Committee to take a friendly amendment to take out the words executive, because it's redundant. I'd also like to point out that this morning, when I spoke about the sponsor of the bill and his ambition to get this bill passed, I neglected to say that I've heard that he has told people he wants to be the first freshman to pass a bill. That's very ambitious, but I think he's found a good piece of political theater to get passed.
Gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Georgia reserves the balance of his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized. The gentleman from Massachusetts controls the time.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I now recognize for 2 minutes.
Would the
Mr.
gentleman
Chairman,
yield? Would
the gentleman from Massachusetts controls the time.
I was